Good afternoon, and welcome to APTA's annual meeting back-to-back sessions. For Part 1, a conversation with U.S. Transportation Secretary Foxx, please welcome a member of APTA's Board of Directors, Charlotte Area Transit System Chief Executive Officer, Carolyn Flowers.
Good afternoon. We have a number of special guests today, and I'm pleased to actually introduce one of them, and then she will introduce our other special guests. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who represents the 18th District of Texas in the United States House of Representatives. The 18th District is right here in Houston, and the Congresswoman has represented her community in the U.S. Congress for over 20 years now. I know she'll tell you more about her relationship with Secretary Foxx, but I run the transit system in the city of Charlotte, where he's from, and he served as the mayor before being nominated as his transportation secretary. I have nothing but good things to say about him and what he did in Charlotte and what he's doing now here for this nation. I'm sure you'll agree with the positive sentiments of the Congresswoman when she shares that with us. Congresswoman Jackson Lee has been a champion for public transportation here in Houston, and she's been a leader on the issue of Homeland Security. She has fought for a Transportation Security Centers of Excellence program, which is focused on the resilience of the nation's multimodal infrastructure to prevent terrorist attacks. I know the Congresswoman has been an active member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Over the years, she's worked on, among many other efforts, comprehensive immigration reform and reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. Congresswoman Jackson Lee was instrumental in Houston's effort to secure a $94 million grant for the Houston North Corridor light rail line, as well as $10 million Tiger grant for road, rail, and transit purposes. As chairwoman and ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Transportation Security and Infrastructure Protection, she was a leader in the effort to enhance technology, improve security for railroads, and implement the recommendations on the 9/11 Commission report, which recognized the threat potential for public transportation. She was also a champion collective bargaining rights by TSA employees. It is my honor to introduce Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and she has effectively served the people of Houston and all of the United States for many years. Congresswoman Jackson Lee, please be welcomed by our APTA friends here. Thank you.
I love public transportation of all kinds. I don't know if there are champions of public transportation in this room. I'm going to say it one more time. I love public transportation and all of you. Thank you so very much. Let me thank Michael for his leadership, being the CEO and president of APTA and also a neighbor of ours in Washington, D.C. I'd like to acknowledge Chairman Phil Washington from Denver and the great work that they have done. Give them a very big hand. You know I'm home in the district, so I've got to make sure I acknowledge the great work that has been done at the Houston Metro. Have they been good hosts? Let me thank Tom Lambert, Tom Jason, and I think Alan Watson, the vice chair of the board, is here, Dwight Jefferson, Terrence Fontaine, and certainly we are delighted to be able to say that my colleagues, Al Green and Jean Green, congresspersons who are contiguous to this area, also welcome you. And I don't know if my friend and colleague, Congressman Ed Pastor, is in the room. Pastor, Has he arrived yet? Well, we want to thank Ed Pastor. He'll be here, and he certainly has been a strong supporter of rail. And also my friend, Ambassador Art Schechter. We thank him so very much. And Chairman Gilbert Garcia, who's been with you throughout. Let's give Houston a big hand. They love having you here, and we thank you. What a friend indeed that we have with the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Secretary Anthony Foxx. I think you can just applaud on his name. Having started after being a judge in the Houston City Council, I know where the rubber hits the road, and I want to thank all the mayors that are here, my mayor, Anise Parker, and the many other mayors, and we know that our secretary was a former mayor. He obviously knows where the rubber hits the road. He now leads an agency with more than 55,000 employees and $70 billion budget, oversees air, maritime, surface transportation. His primary goal is to ensure that America maintains the safest, most efficient transportation system in the world. He joined the Department of Transportation after serving as a mayor of Charlotte, North Carolina, and a long list of experiences, including his knowledge of efficient and innovative transportation investment, the centerpiece of Charlotte's job creation, economic recovery. He knows how to put the pieces together, and he is a strong supporter of public transportation. These investments, extending the Lynx light rail system, the largest capital project ever undertaken by the city, which will build new roads, bridges, transit, as well as bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Thank you to the transit professionals here of recognizing that in addition to the public transit that we think of in buses and trains and others, that the idea of hike and bike trails are very important. That's one of the first grants that I brought to this city, started the network in Houston of hike and bike trails. Let's give hike and bike trails a big hand, and the Secretary knows about it real well. He expanded the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, the 6th busiest in the world, working with the state of North Carolina to accelerate the I-45 Outer Belt Loop using creative design finance approach, the first major project of its kind in North Carolina, and starting the Charlotte Streetcar Project. Does this secretary know about transportation? My answer is yes, he does. I was delighted to be able to work with him to secure the ending part of a $900 million grant, which is a $94 million grant here for Houston's light rail, and then, of course, a Texas Tiger grant dealing with issues of investing in the technology of road, rail, and others. But the key of this secretary is he understands the economic engine that transportation projects create. Do you understand that? Economic engine. I want to personally thank him for that last chunk of monies for the light rail, which then led us to also be able to secure the building of the first Martin Luther King Memorial Plaza outside of Washington in the last 10 years, which was an economic engine and now a destination site with a rebuild of a park and the memorial. It was this secretary who saw the vision of the idea of an economic engine. Give him a very big hand when you invest these transportation dollars. I want to thank the Black Heritage Society for their vision as well. Secretary Foxx brings a renewed energy and diversity to the President's cabinet that will help our country create jobs, strengthen the middle class, and secure a brighter future for generations to come. He is a strong and dedicated person, having come from the city of Charlotte, in investing in small, minority, and women-owned businesses. In the federal government, we call it DBE. I know you're leaders in that, and Secretary Foxx has a strong commitment to making sure that he helps and to build that infrastructure of job creation. Lastly, let me see this. I see in Secretary Foxx a role model, a quiet giant, if you will, who stands as a role model for boys and girls across America. And I'm so proud that he's willing to be that role model. And in fact, when he came to Houston for transportation issues, he was willing to sit with young men and women to talk about opportunities and how he was so successful by listening, learning, studying, and following the values of his family and this nation. What a wonderful example that we now have to speak to you. An individual who was elected the mayor of a great city, who worked in the United States Congress and helped many of us as members of Congress, served as a council member, chaired the Transportation Committee, and helped shepherd the largest transportation bond ever in the city's history. He knows his work, he knows his values, he knows his nation. I'm so grateful that President Barack Obama appointed this very distinguished American as Secretary of Transportation. Would you welcome our Secretary, the fighting Secretary for all of you, Secretary Anthony Foxx of the Department of Transportation.
Thank you. Thank you, APTA. It's great to be here with you this afternoon. I can't tell you what a great pleasure it is to receive an introduction from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, someone who is a fierce fighter for American values, for transit and transportation. And my goodness, she never lacks enthusiasm. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. And let's also give a big hand to Peter Varga and to Michael Malanfi, sorry, I messed him up. Y'all know who I'm talking about. And to Caroline Flowers for helping to put this incredible expo together. Let's give them a big round of applause. Since I'm here at a great meeting of wonderful folks, I do want to say that our team at the Federal Transit Administration is an incredible collection of people who every day are working with you to ensure that America keeps moving and that folks are able to get where they need to go. And I want to give a big shout out to Therese McMillan, the leader of that agency, and to all of our folks who are here today. Please give them a round of applause for the great work that they do. So the first thing that I want to say today, and this is a bit of a mission for me, is that when we get together in our various associations and industries, we tend to get hyper-technical. You know, there's a lot of bricks and mortar and concrete and steel and, 60-foot buses versus 48-foot buses or what have you to talk about. Those are important subjects. But what I really want us to spend the next few minutes thinking about is, why do we do this? Who are we working for? And what does it matter? And I recall growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I lived most of my life with my grandparents. My grandmother, who had been a French teacher in middle school, never got a driver's license. So she would, on Saturday mornings, wake me up, and we would go down to the center city, but the only way we could get there was by way of bus. And as we would take the bus, she would show me various things. This is how you put the money in. This is how you do a transfer. This is how you find the bus on a map so you know where you're going. And it didn't occur to me until many years later when I was pursuing my first job how much I had learned from my grandmother about this way of getting around that didn't require me to have a driver's license or even to be old enough to drive. You see, behind everything you do, there are millions of stories of people who are trying to make a living, trying to live the American dream in a very real sense. And as I get around the country, what I realize even more is how hard folks are fighting. I was in Detroit just a few weeks ago, met two young men who attend Cass Tech High School. These young men are doing everything you would want them to do. They're soon to be Eagle Scouts. They're athletes, scholars, but every now and again, the bus they need to take them home after school is late, or sometimes doesn't come at all, and so they get home at like 8, leaving very little time to do homework or prepare for the next day. Or I think of the young woman out in Crenshaw who never thought she would find herself in a career in transportation. But because we're now involved in building the LA Crenshaw light rail project out there, she now is not only working, she's doing the job that she thought only men can do. But she now believes she can do it better. As I look around the country, even down in Birmingham, Alabama, where a little high school senior told me the story about how her mother gets her up in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. They board a bus to get down to downtown Birmingham, where her mother goes off to work and where her daughter transfers to school. And without that transit bus, she would not be able to go to that particular school, which is giving her a pathway to success. You see, behind what you all are doing, undergirding it is the American dream. And when we don't work as well as we can or should, Americans can't either. And what I continue to say all across this country is that I am working for and fighting for a transportation system that is as good as the American people are. And together we can do it. You've been holding an annual meeting for over 132 years. But all that history considered, I do believe that now is perhaps the most pivotal time over those 132 years. A time when the future is unclear. You know, over the last 10 years, we've not had a 6-year reauthorization bill, which has meant incredible challenges at the local level. And I can tell you, having been a mayor during this time, I can tell you how tough it is. Not knowing how to plan, not knowing how much you're going to have next year, trying to figure out service levels. We have a responsibility collectively to remind this country that when the wheels of transportation grind to a halt, so does America. So does its economy. So do its businesses. And so do its people. And so, as we pursue our effort to get a reauthorization bill passed that provides funding certainty and policy certainty for transportation in this country, APTA is a critical organization, and each of you individually are critical voices because you know what's happening in your backyard. And the more the folks in Washington hear from you and from your constituencies about those issues and challenges, the more ripe the opportunity will be for us to get something done. You're the ones, after all, who reported last year that transit ridership was higher than it's been in 6 decades. In fact, our system could have moved the world's population 1.5 times over in 2013 because 10.7 billion trips were taken during that year. And on the other hand, for all the demand for transit, we're not seeing the supply. Across the country, there are still too many stops, as I mentioned before, where the bus comes late and too many places where the platforms are overcrowded and the trains are delayed and slow and need to be replaced. In fact, and you all know this, we have a backlog of $86 billion. Sorry, I was talking like a mayor for a second. $86 billion in backlog transit repairs, more than the federal government spends on all forms of transportation every year. But here's what I think the most alarming fact is that with a lot of deferred maintenance and folks already overcrowded in a lot of systems and more capacity needed, just imagine waking up in the year 2050 when we have 100 more million people, many of them needing or wanting to move by transit, and we haven't even addressed the backlog of maintenance. Just imagine what kind of congestion we're setting ourselves up for. Imagine what types of quality of life challenges we're setting ourselves up for. This is an entirely avoidable problem. This spring, the U.S. DOT put forward the most ambitious funding proposal for transit this country has ever seen. It's called the Grow America Act, and it would increase funding for all modes of transportation on the surface system, but it would increase transit funding by 70%. 70%. But instead of taking it down the hall and passing it right away, Congress patched our surface system for another 10 months, setting up another potential funding crisis next May, which is the beginning of the construction season. And that brings me to the punchline, which is, given the great needs we have as a country when it comes to infrastructure, given the growth that we see coming down the pike, given the backlog of maintenance needs, why are we not doing more? If the American people are swiping their Metro cards and passing through turnstiles in record numbers, why aren't we investing more to meet their needs? Well, I can tell you that there are some folks in Washington who stood squarely behind an increase in transit funding, and Congresswoman Jackson Lee is one of them. But we don't have enough critical mass yet to get over the line. The short-term patch passed by Congress this summer was just the latest in a pattern of the same kind of behavior. Congress has passed 28 short-term measures in the last 6 years. Now, we can complain about Congress. Maybe in some senses we should. But then again, we've always complained about Congress in this country. And complaining, as we've seen, doesn't change much. If we're being honest with ourselves, the reality we face is that all of us who are engaged in this discussion as stakeholders bear a responsibility for making it abundantly clear to our policymakers how important this moment is, what the real costs of continuing to patch our way into the future will be, what the real benefit of real, long-term, sustainable investment in transportation will be. And if we fail collectively to make that case effectively, shame on us. We have to remember that our democracy doesn't just exist on Election Day. The American people are in charge, and when they have the facts, the American people are wise enough to press for what they want. So our job is to give them the facts. And I think folks are already voting with their feet because they're using transit in record numbers. And so our job is just to help folks understand the connection between Washington acting and their everyday life. Now, I admit that this is not easy. I suppose if it were easy, we would have a 6-year bill or something like it already. But we have to make the argument that funding transit actually transcends some of the politics that have existed for a while. You know, there are some corners of this country where transit is seen as kind of a urban issue. But I know that there's rural transit in America. And many of you know it too, because you're living it. In fact, I took a bus tour last spring, and I ended up in Anniston, Alabama, a town of fewer than 5,000 people. And I went to a plant there where folks were making buses. So I went into the plant, and I said, well, where are you making the buses? Making them for Dallas, making them for Washington, for Minneapolis. So even when you get down into the workforce, you know, if we don't make substantial investments in transit, it doesn't just hurt the folks in urban communities, it hurts folks in rural America. But in fact, there is a substantial amount of transit service that reaches across urban, rural, and suburban communities all over America. It's not red or blue. It's American. And when Americans have access to it, they use it. So I think we've got some work to do in terms of making this issue one that cuts across those old lines. 2 weeks ago, I was in Sandy, Utah. One might say that Sandy, Utah is a red town in a very red state. But they've built a lot of light rail there recently, and now they're developing whole communities around transit. And people are thrilled about it. I was there for the groundbreaking of the first transit-oriented development project in Utah. It's a big deal. Or what about Omaha, Nebraska, which just received a Tiger grant to build the first bus rapid transit system in the state of Nebraska? It's a pretty big deal. You see, the old lines are falling down because the need for transit cuts across communities all over the country. So we have to tell Congress that we need not only to top off the Highway Trust Fund, we actually need more resources to address the needs of a growing country. Now, let me say this too, that we understand the importance of workforce development and the connection between that and transit. And in fact, our Grow America Act improves the way we build our transit system by also improving and expanding the group of people who helped build it. Over 4 years, the bill puts $80 million into workforce development programs for transit. It's a big deal. And by the way, we're not just waiting for the Grow America Act to achieve swift passage in Congress. This is an issue we're already working on at DOT. In fact, today I can announce that DOT will be granting $9 million in workforce development grants. This is money that will go towards helping folks that haven't often benefited from transit projects being built in their own backyards. We're talking about minority communities and veterans and folks with low incomes. It's exciting, and I know my team at FTA can't wait to work with you on bringing these opportunities to America. I know that APTA has taken some pretty important steps and announced your new advocacy efforts. And Phil Washington, I am so grateful to you for that. You have 68,000 transit advocates in your database. And I hope you relay the message to every single one of them. But as important as APTA is, we need the voice of more than just one organization to help us move the country forward. One of the things that I found interesting as Secretary of Transportation is that when we go to meet with groups about various reauthorization issues, the highway community is very skilled at arguing for highways. The transit community, very adept at arguing for transit. The rail community is good at doing their thing. But now is a time for this country to see these constellation of stakeholders come together to argue for transportation. Because the reality is, if you're the end user of these systems, you need them all to work. If we have great highways but low quality transit, our country's going to be stuck in traffic. If we have great transit, poor highways, some of our transit's not going to work. I would add rail into the mix. And I guess the question is, can we come together as stakeholders and rally around a common group of solutions to help Congress get over the hump and help this country move forward? Can y'all help me work with that? We need to do that. So I'm asking you to advocate for not only getting the Highway Trust Fund back stabilized, but for increases to meet a growing country's needs. I'm asking you to work with your partner agencies, be it state DOTs or chambers of commerces, be it the organizations that sit in Washington. Work together on a surface transportation approach that this Congress can pass. And I'm also urging you to take this Grow America Act as part of your advocacy, as part of your working together, because it reflects the most forward-leaning vision for transportation that I think this country's seen in quite some time. But it's only as good as all of our abilities to husband ourselves together and push forward. And I think we can. So folks, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate the work that you all do every single day. You have no idea how many people, well, maybe you do have an idea, how many people depend on what you do. And it hurts me when we as a department can't do more to relieve those crowded buses and to extend those crowded tracks. But that's a function of the work we have ahead of us over the next several months. The last thing I want to tell you is that Congress, Republicans and Democrats actually want to get this right. I believe that. But in order to do it, the urgency's got to be there. And so for us collectively, I think our biggest job is to figure out how to raise the level of urgency and visibility on these issues. America has spent a lot of time, energy, capital, and attention trying to push forward a transportation system that we've all inherited. And for another generation of Americans to walk into a country that is strong and robust and ready for the future, we've got to get this right. And so I just ask you to forget the wars of the past 10 years, the fits and starts, the stops and starts. We've got to go at this hard over the next several months, all the way through. And I believe if we work together, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, we're going to see Congress do something that maybe no one expects them to do, but I know it can be done, but only if we're united and working together. So thank you very much. It's great to be with you. Keep up the great work. Thank you, APTA.